Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got another amazing story coming to us from the US. We have Elizabeth Anglin on board today. Elizabeth is the author of the book titled Experience, Memoirs of an Abducted Childhood, a book about living as an alien abductee and an abduction research subject. She is a lifelong experiencer, and her youth was a storm of terribly strange events. Elizabeth would eventually meet Dr. John E. Mack, becoming one of his first research subjects as he began his research to make sense of the contact experience. She worked with him from 1990 through 1997. Elizabeth was a skeptic, though she had experienced some strange things and was afraid of aliens for most of her childhood. She considered her fears to be irrational. She didn't believe friends and family members who said they saw aliens or had relationships with aliens, or even had been alien in a past life. She thought they were suffering from stress or an inability to distinguish dreams from reality. Then on November 29, 1989, she found herself face to face with an alien in her apartment and realized this kind of event happened before. Even worse, she realized that a boy she knew growing up had probably been killed when abduction experience went wrong, and that aliens can make mistakes, sometimes deadly mistakes. Terrified, she contacted abduction researcher Bud Hopkins, who put her in touch with Dr. John Mack at Harvard University. Soon after, she became one of the first abductees to research abduction experiences with Dr. Mack. Elizabeth appears as the abductee Anne, discussing the nature of time in the book Abduction by Dr. John E. Mack, and as Amy in Alien Discussions, Proceedings of the Abduction Study Conference held at MIT. As a member of a wider group of abductees, her information also appears in Dr. John Mack's Passport to the Cosmos. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. And I like your show. I like what you're doing. So I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Could we before we get into your story, could we talk about a bit of your family history? Because we did talk about this before the show, that some of your family members had experiences as well.
Yeah. So you asked about my family. So my dad, who is now 89, was an experiencer. He talked to Dr. Mack at length during a visit over Thanksgiving in 1991, 92, something like that. He had been a lifelong experiencer. My grandfather had experiences. I never met my grandfather. He died right as I was being born, just before I was born, in the late 60s. And but he had experiences that he was very frightened about. I'm not sure of the depth of them. I just know that he was from Northwest Alabama, in Marion County, Alabama, and he saw a ship in the road around sort of not seed pod, but what we call seed pot out here in the Southwest. They're saucer shaped. And he saw a saucer shaped ship in the road on his way to Hackleburg, Alabama, from Hamilton on the back road. Never drove the back road again. He absolutely refused to drive the back road from between Hamilton, Alabama and Hackleburg, Alabama at that point. My dad was getting abducted around the same age I was, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. And he was in the closet about it. And when I was growing up, every so often he would kind of just lose it and start spouting about how he had another family living with them, and he had another wife living with them, and usually he'd start spouting when I would see something that looked like a UFO. And I'd say, "Hey, Dad, I just saw a UFO behind the barn." And around age, I was 16 or 17, I came in one night having seen this craft. It was just a light, but it was February, and we had 10 acres that looked across 16 square miles of open land behind our farm. But at the back of our farm was a creek, and there was this light flashing, just like firefly. It was like flash, like a firefly flash. And I was like, oh, wow, firefly. And I thought, wait a minute, it's February. There are no fireflies out in February. And then all of a sudden the light stayed on and took off straight up at incredible speeds from, and it was, I was probably not more than 100 yards from it, and or maybe 150 at most, and it just went straight up. So I didn't see any shape of the craft or anything like that, but it convinced me that it was otherworldly, because nothing can go straight up at incredible speed and then get up to the level that it was. I mean, it really went off into the stars going straight up. And there are no fireflies in February. So I'm a teenager. I run back in the house. I just put the horses up, and I said to my dad, hey, I just saw a UFO. And he said, don't tell anybody. And I said, what do you mean don't tell anybody? And he said, they'll think you're crazy. They'll put you in a rubber room. And I said, Dad, everybody knows I'm not crazy. I'm the one everybody comes to for advice. Even my teachers come to me for advice. Like they all know I'm not crazy. All the kids know I'm not crazy. It's like, when stuff would happen, everybody would look at me and be like, Elizabeth, what are we supposed to make of this? So I'm just looking at my dad, and then all of a sudden he starts spouting off all of this dual reference stuff about, his family and his other kids, and how, he wishes he were with them, and how he is not really liking his earth life, and it's so much easier and it's so much easier on the alien side of things. And he went on for some period of time, and I'm just listening to him, and I'm thinking, yeah, Dad, you better not talk about that, because people will think you're crazy. Because I'm kind of thinking you're crazy. And I didn't really, what's funny now is to look at myself and go, well, I tell people about my grandchildren that are living with aliens and things like that. And they're like, okay, you're crazy. And I'm like, yeah, I know it sounds that way, but that's not what's going on. So Dad had a hard time talking about it. When John Mack came to visit Thanksgiving weekend in 91, I think it was 91, they talked for 5 hours. He went home, and after dinner, he was washing dishes, and he ended up saying, they're going to kill me because I talked. And he started throwing all the dishes across the room, like breaking all the fine Thanksgiving china, because he was afraid he was going to be killed. And that was not something that I ever experienced. I had never had this sort of mind control of, if I talk, they'll kill me. In fact, mine was quite the opposite. It was, no, you're supposed to talk. But my dad had a really bad reaction to even talking about it. So it was kind of heartbreaking to see him open up, and he got wide open and talked to Dr. Mack, and then he just closed down. I had to go to bed early. I mean, we stopped him from breaking all the dishes. He sat on the couch just sort of out of it. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me. And then he went to bed, and he woke up fine the next day. But that was sad to see. My brother TJ was always aware of blue balls of light, orbs that would come into his room, beings that would connect with him. One of the pilots of a craft that I had worked with my brother TJ, and I have an extended story about this pilot. TJ called him Pedo, but Pedo was who I called the little white man. He was short, very, very white, maybe 3.5 feet tall at most. Always wore a light blue-gray white robe, like it kind of had a different colors when you saw it in the sun. So Pedo and TJ had this relationship that TJ could actually talk about. And because I was already working with Dr. Mack, my family let him talk about his relationship with Pedo and what he would go do when Pedo came around and what he would learn. But Pedo died because he was old. And later on, I found out how Pedo died, and there's another part of the story to that. So it was interesting having a half brother who knew some of the beings that I knew, and TJ and Pito, that ended up becoming really interesting. But yeah, he got old and he died in a craft, and under the water. And people were saying, "Hey TJ, have you seen Pito?" And he's like, "No, he's dead." Well, how'd he die? He got old. We found out later, yeah, he's at the bottom of a lake because he got old and he died. He had an aneurysm. So anyway, that was an opportunity that became a missed opportunity. But it was good. My sister had my experiences with me, but not with me. So what would happen when we were young, she was 5 years older than me. We shared the same bedroom and the same queen size bed. And my parents didn't have a lot of money. My dad was a teacher. My mom didn't work. And so we're sharing this bed, and aliens are showing up, and she's getting turned off. So she can't move. She's getting paralyzed. And they're taking me away, paralyzing her and taking me away. So she ends up telling my parents or our parents, that I kick and scratch and fight her in my sleep, and that she has bruises on her leg and all over her, and she's in a lot of pain because while I'm sleeping, I'm such a violent sleeper. So I grew up my entire life thinking that nobody would ever be able to sleep with me because I was a violent sleeper. And when I found out about the alien stuff, she said, "Well, okay, no, you weren't really a violent sleeper. It was, I didn't want the aliens coming because I really hated it when they came, and I couldn't move and I couldn't hang on to you and I couldn't do anything, and they were pulling you out of bed, and I was wondering if they were going to take me too. So I just told mom and dad that you were hurting me while you were sleeping, because I didn't know what else to say to them." So she's got more of a terror kind of thing about aliens, because she never had she always had the beginning of the experience, the watching them take me out. They never took her, they never did things to her, but that was frightening enough for her. And unfortunately, her terror had turned in so deep that when I arranged to not be abducted anymore, I also arranged to still be able to see family members. And we had a Monday or Tuesday night arrangement where my son would show up with his godfather, who was also a little white man, and we would go do stuff, or at least talk and things. And I was living in Western Colorado at the time, and it was a great place because it was this high montane bowl with mountains all around it and no people, so they could easily come in and park. And they parked behind the guest house at the ranch. And my sister was in the guest house because I forgot they were coming, and I forgot to tell her. And I had told her before, "Hey, I have a 2-mile radius, restraining order from abductions. You're safer with me than you are any other place in the world. Nobody will abduct you." But I didn't tell her, but my kids might show up. And so my son Arthur showed up with the engineer, his godfather, and they walked up on the porch to the guest house, and she knew they were there. She could hear them talking to each other, and she immediately freaked out and started yelling and screaming at them to go away. And so they just left. And I get up in the morning, and I have my sister screaming at me saying, "I thought you had a 2-mile radius restraining order." I said, "Well, not for my son, who happens to be your nephew." And she just was beside herself. And so we had a huge falling out over the fact that I wasn't going to restrain family. It's not a thing. And my son is actually, he's human. He's not part alien, the son that I'm talking about. My hybrid program, they were trying to get pilots who were human to fly craft, because it's hard for aliens to fly craft in Earth atmosphere. They're not resonating with things like thunderstorms and radiation waves and different things that we have going on here, they easily get bumped out of. You have to be in a mind space that's very specific in order to navigate, and they easily get bumped out of that mind space by things that hit them in our atmosphere. So different kinds of microwaves, different kinds of electrical storms, just they go and all of a sudden you have aliens crashing because they got overwhelmed by our atmosphere. So it's easier for them to have humans do it because we're used to it. We're used to this kind of density of atmosphere. We're used to these kinds of waves, electronic waves, all the whole thing. So if you can get a human who can focus in the way that they focus and do the things that they do, and you've been breeding for that for a long time, then you're golden. You can fly ships in near Earth atmosphere without losing so many. So that was kind of, because I worked with Dr. Mack and because I did so many things, so like 27 regressions overall, plus I learned to remote view, so I can remote view my own things. Plus I'm telepathic and I'm actively telepathic. I can ask the people that I know from my experiences and have asked them, what's my purpose? What do you do with me? Why are you doing this? And I know all of that stuff. And so in a way it's good. In another way it's bad because I can't tell very many people because they're like, yeah, you're crazy. But I know my story, and I think that's all any of us get in life, really. We have our own experience of life and we have our own story. And we're not taking any of our stuff with us. That's what we're taking is our experience when we go. So
let's get into your childhood a bit if you want to.
Sure. So the first time there was anything about abduction, I was 3, and I was abducted with my dad. But he wasn't home. He was away in a botany research program at the University of California, Berkeley. And so he was on a field trip in the Sierras on a bus, and his experience of the abduction was that the bus driver saw a saucer-shaped craft, a small one, in the road, and they were going up the side. They were going over a pass. So there's a steep side of a mountain on one side, there's a road, then there's a steep side down. So you can't really turn a bus around. You have nowhere to go. You're going up or you're going down, and that's all you have to do. So this craft is parked in the road. The bus driver sees it, and he tries to back up down the pass. But before he can back up down the pass, and this is what my dad is like the third row back, he sees the bus driver turning to look to see if he can back up and go down the pass, and then the bus driver is paralyzed. He's just frozen, and the bus stops, and everybody else on the bus is frozen. And my dad gets escorted off the bus, and then he doesn't remember anything else. So I'm a little kid, and the only thing I remember is all of a sudden I'm sitting on these very ergonomically correct chairs. My dad is sitting in a chair. I'm sitting on a bench. My dad is over to my left, and he's here and I'm here. I'm kind of perpendicular to him. And these little gray guys, and these are actually gray, not white, not blue, not yellow, in gray robes, are pointing a very sophisticated looking gun to the side of his head. And I'm thinking, all of the cop shows you see as a kid, bad guys have guns and bad guys point guns at people's heads, So I'm screaming, but to me, I don't realize I'm screaming. I just hear this incredible bandsaw type shriek. And it takes me a moment before I realize, because all the aliens look at me and I see their big eyes under their hoods. They all look at me. They all turn like, what the hell? They stop, they don't do anything else, and they're just like, what the hell? And I'm like, this is a little kid with lungs, that's what the hell. And then I realize I'm the bandsaw sound as they're looking at me. And then I'm saying to them, hey, you can do anything you want to me, but just leave my daddy alone. Don't shoot my daddy in the head. And the next thing I know, it's like I'm released from wherever I am, and my next memory is hitting my bed. Like, I didn't just like get put back in bed. I hit the bed and woke up, and was so it was like a really, really bad nightmare. I ran to my mom and I told my mom the whole story of what I had seen. These bad men had my daddy. They were shooting my daddy in the head. And so my mom gets up and she tries to call and see if she can get him in California, but he's not home, which it's the middle of the night there. It's still very early in the morning. And she's upset because why is her husband not where he's supposed to be at 4 o'clock in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And he doesn't get back to her until much later. And then he says to her, he says, I'm coming home. I'll come home. And she's like, well, why would you do that? And he said, because something happened. We were on a field trip and we missed, it was over 9 hours of time. So it must have been evening, and it was dark before they realized they were back on the bus. So it had been daytime, it was dark. And then they came back to Berkeley from the Sierras, but they were really, really late getting back. So he says they missed 9 hours of time from that. So I never really thought about it till now, that how my mom must have been really, really upset because he wasn't there at 5 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning. But he flew home. He stopped his master's leading to PhD program, which he was in, and didn't pick it up again. And he flew home. He was hoping he could protect me, but there wasn't really anything he could do at the time. And yeah, so that was the first one. Very little. Remembered it. Remembered what a kerfuffle. Remembered that it stopped my dad's academic career. And then I had other things. I had different, what I would think of as dreams, where this white man in a white van would float through the ceiling and float me up through the ceiling and into the white van. And he would come on a white blue beam of light. This van would come on a white blue beam of light, and he would float me up through the ceiling. And I hated that. And so I was afraid of windows at night because I was afraid of seeing alien faces through windows at night. I was afraid. I had always had like 5 quilts on my bed. And even if it was summertime, like to hold me down. I had, before I talked to Dr. Mack, I had a reasonable eating disorder, which was after my experiences, I would be so upset that I would binge on like Oreos. And I wouldn't do it all the time, but if I came back after an experience and I was trying to sort through it and didn't really know what was going on, I would have urges to eat. And that was kind of normal for other people in our support group as well. After I learned, like immediately after my first regression, that went away, which was awesome. Because when you're in that state where you're trying to self-medicate through some kind of substance, you really are in a kind of gray, half asleep, half awake fugue state. But not being in that state is lovely. It's lovely to live not in that state. So my initial thought of Dr. Mack was, wow, this is great. I want to get regressed as much as possible so I can be as clear as possible. I feel like I've all of a sudden woken up. My first regression was awful, but it was, with him was awful. The one before that was somebody else was even more awful, but it was, being awake was great to what was going on.
I'll ask you a question regarding your dad, because you said that you were being dropped on the bed. Now, do you think you were out of body and you connected with your father during that event?
That's what I wondered about. But I could have also been dropped because, I was a mewling, squirming, screaming little crap, like 3-year old. And I have conscious experiences of being put back in bed, very gently and lovingly.
Mhm.
But if I'm fighting, they might have just gone, poop, so it could have been I was out of my body. It could have been I was 3 and I was fighting them, and they just like, oh, let's just go, get rid of her, let's get out of here. So yeah, I've always had a question about that. Astral things do happen, and I've had sometimes I do go out in the astral and see my kids, and it's a completely astral experience, and they can see me, but they're working with telepathy and intuitive sight all the time, and that's one thing aliens do. And what I wanted to get into is that, look, abductees, we have it made in terms of our intuitive ability and our telepathic abilities. And, as long as we focus on those, we can really be helpful to everybody else in terms of medical intuition, bringing people up to speed on the full capacity of the human mind, et cetera, and so on. You all have a universal translator in there. Everybody, even if you're not an abductee, your mind is a universal translator. So, but yeah, I wondered, because was I in the astral? Did I just pop in, or did they actually take me? So I don't know.
Because I remember a time when I was when I used to tell my mom there were people in my room when I was 3, and this lasted for maybe a year and a half too, until my brother was born. And so I was so afraid, knowing that they were there, that I'd sleep with my belly against the wall the entire time. And that I slept like that up until the age of 11, roughly. And during those like final years, until I eventually stopped. One time, but this time I recall I'm conscious, my eyes are closed, but I notice that my legs are in the air at a 45-degree angle, and I cry out no in my mind. And as soon as I do that, I feel my both legs falling to the bed with a thump, and then I black out. So after that, I started sleeping normally, or during those years. But that reminded me of that a bit, so I just wanted to share.
Yeah, stuff like that. I think a lot of us did that. Like, how do we sleep safe? Like, what position do you get in? Mine would be, I sleep on my side because I wouldn't be able to see out a window from the bed that I was in. So I'm now a left side sleeper, which is kind of bad for your heart. But that was the one where I wasn't directly looking at some window.
Yeah.
So if I couldn't see it, maybe it wouldn't happen. Yeah. No. Yeah. And it's interesting that you say no too. I have met people since then who have had a woman who was an abductee, had her kid that was an abductee, but she had 4 children. And one of them had very clearly said, when they approached her, no, like it was a flat out, she was the authority in her own body. And it was just this calm, flat out authoritarian, not even a whist of fear in her, where she had said to the aliens, no. And they never took her. She remembered the experience, but she was very young. She was like 4 years old. And she had just said, nope. And they never took her. And her mom, who was the experiencer, knew this. She's like, yeah, she said no, and they left her alone. So there are different kinds of no's. There's the no from your divine power, and then there's the no, oh hell no, and then there's the mad no, and then there's the angry no, but there's the disempowered no. So there isn't how do you tell somebody how to be in their power when they say no? I wish that was an easily translatable thing, because it matters. Like, they know how you say no, and if you really mean it from your inner power, they're not going to take you. So anyway,
what happened to you after that event with your dad? That you were brought back. What happened to the years after that?
So One thing I noticed right away was I was really a telepathic kid. I had animal communication with the horse that my dad rode, who was kind of my horse. When I was 4 years old, I had a speech disorder, which all my L's and my Y's were messed up. So leave me alone was you me a yon. And I went outside. My whole family was making fun of me at dinner one night because I wanted to tell a story, and there were L's and Y's in it. And then I ended up saying "Leave me a yon," and they all ended up laughing. And I ended up running outside to get the horse to sympathize with me. and, and she it was the first time she'd ever done this. I'd been riding this horse and hanging out with this horse since I was 6 months old. And she reached over the fence, and I was reaching up to pet her and saying, "They're so mean. They won't let me tell my story. They don't listen to me, blah, blah, blah." And I reached up to touch her nose, and she bit me really hard, like super hard. And it hurt a lot. And my brain cleared up because I was now in pain from being bitten. So my whole narrative of them being mean went away in ow, you know. And I heard her voice and then saw pictures in my head of her showing me, and she said very clearly in human words, "Be grateful for what you have. It could be far worse. You could be a horse and unable to talk at all." And then she showed me this whole montage of how many times she had been abused and how many bad things had been done to her. And she couldn't talk, so she couldn't tell anybody all these ways she'd been abused up until the time my dad got her, and he wasn't abusive. And I went, oh, oh, oh my, and I stopped feeling sorry for myself. And then we had a connection, a telepathic connection from then on. But I always wanted more. I wanted to be Dr. Dolittle. And I was like, why is it just this horse? Why don't turtles talk to me? Dang it. So I had this, my mom would say I had magical thinking, but I really didn't. I had the telepathy, which you get from working with aliens. So, anyway, what was your question?
Well, what are the events that happened to you after the one with your dad?
So there's lots. There was a group event at my elementary school. In my book, I write about two friends, Carrie and Emma, their sisters. They were part of this group event. It doesn't appear to have been an abduction, but some of the kids, the buses were coming in. It was the beginning of the day, and the craft looked like, so when the sun comes up and it's almost 8 o'clock in the morning, and you see the disk of the sun, like you're not looking directly at it, but the disk is a certain size. The craft was disc shape, relatively the same size as the sun, but silver, like a silvery amorphous gray, not a shiny gray, but more of a misty silvery gray that had some differences in color. And I noticed it because I was sitting in the back of the bus, and the sun, we turned to the west, and the sun was coming up, and then all of a sudden there was a disc right next to it that wasn't the sun, that was around the same size. And I went, oh my God, there are two suns and one's gray, And the bus driver noticed it. And when the bus driver noticed it, she sped up to get to the school. And when she stopped the bus, and she said, "I want all of you to go directly into the building. Don't stop." And we were like, and we were all supposed to do what she said. And some of us were stopping and looking up because the silver disc was over the yard in between where the buses stopped and the door to the school. And so Emma, who was the younger sister, was looking up and had gotten frozen in position just looking up. And I was trying to get her to come into the school, and I couldn't get her to move. And my cousin, who had been sitting in the back of the bus with me, he was yelling at me because he was looking up and he was seeing the silver disc, and he wasn't frozen, but he was just like, oh crap, So he was yelling at me to leave Emma alone because I needed to get into the school, because he was more concerned about me than my friend. And he was like, get over here now. And I finally left her, and we all went inside. The teacher seemed to be aware of it. Everybody seemed to be aware of it. And there was like a 15-20 minute pause in like everything. Like we're people that were inside in the rooms, nobody was in the hallway. There was a pause. And then all of a sudden, all this movement started again. People started coming in the main doors that had been outside. The teacher started letting them into the classroom. And some of the teachers went down to talk to the principal, came back, and nobody addressed it. Nobody, it was just like, we're not saying anything. We're not saying that this happened. We're not saying this didn't happen. We're just going to go on with the day. And you have to understand, this was the early 70s. I mean, this was the height of the Cold War. So anything in the sky could be, you don't know what it is. But also, this was Michigan. This was where Gerald Ford had, in the 60s, looked into alien stuff. This was the next county over from Hillsdale County, where all the swamp gas was seen. So, and people had seen stuff, and they had tried to report it, and they had been laughed at. So it was unclear if, what actually happened, but it seemed like the adults and everybody was just like, no, we're not even going to talk about it. We're not going to address it in any way, and just go on. My cousin went a little bit nuts. He kept saying that he saw UFOs on the roof of the school, and I'm like, yeah, that's the duct work for the school. He's like, no, they're still here. You just can't see them. And so I thought he was pretty crazy, thinking that they were still there and we just couldn't see them. And then I got older and I was like, yeah, they can cloak. He wasn't that crazy. They could have been up there and they can cloak. But so that was one thing. I had a lot of missing time. I went missing from the fairgrounds. Started to get on a ride at like 11 o'clock in the morning and didn't get back till 9 o'clock at night. And everybody was looking for me. And my experience of it was, there was a ride I was afraid to get on, and I heard a voice saying, don't get on that ride. And I was all too happy not to get on the ride because I was a little afraid of it. And the voice said, don't get on that ride, go to the teacups. And I like the teacups. So I'm going to follow that voice, right? So, and there I am, 9 years old, getting on the teacups all by myself, because the voice in my head, which was the one I didn't want to get on the scary ride, had said to do. And I remember is walking on and sitting down on the teacups, and I don't remember anything else. And the next thing I remember, I'm outside of the sheep barn, and it's 9 o'clock at night and it's dark. And I was like, whoa, how, why is it dark? What happened to the sun? Who turned the sun off? And what am I doing in front of the sheep barn? And that was, and everybody had been looking for me. They thought that some pedophile had picked me up and taken me away and killed me. And I was, in a trench somewhere, because it had been so much time. So that was one. I was abducted after school. The neighbors were looking for me. My dad was looking for me. I was out playing with a neighbor kid in a ravine, and he went to go get something from the house. And it was a little bit of a walk. When he got back, I was gone. And so he was beside himself because he was the older kid. He was supposed to, take care of me, and I was missing. And that was about 3-4 hours that they were looking. It was just after school, maybe an hour after school. I got, in the spring, I went missing, and just around sunset that they found me. And I was in a different place than why it started off in. So that happened. Lots of white van, scared of the Betty and Barney Hill stuff. Lots of, I thought I saw a plane crashing. As I got older, I realized it was a UFO that was just flying very low. And then cigar shaped. And that's why I thought it was a plane. Yeah. And what's interesting is that it almost looked like it had rivets in it, and that could be a screen memory, but like the kinds of rivets that you would see in a World War II craft. And the windows were square. So, the windows aren't really square on airplanes, but I had never really been on an airplane. I was 12 or 13, 12, I think, at the time. And so I hadn't been on an airplane yet. This light was coming down. I was going to, I had care of the horses from the time I was 8. So I would always put the horses up at night. And in between the house and the barn, this light's coming. I'd already put the horses up, and and I'm like, oh my God, that looks like an airplane light, because it was like the landing lights. It was just a bright white light that was getting closer and closer and closer. And then it got so close, and I didn't hear an engine, but the fuselage. I didn't see any wings. I just saw the fuselage and these square windows, and what now I would recognize as aliens looking at me, but the screen memory was that they were supposed to be people, and they all had funny hats on. Like, the way they were trying to make me think they were humans was they had, like, this lady had a pillbox hat with a big bow coming out of it. The guy had like a top hat that was over on the side, like the Planters Peanuts guy. And, and they're looking at me out of the square windows. And I'm like, oh crap, they're gonna crash. And then the next thing I know, they just keep going and then lift up and are gone. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm glad they didn't crash, but that was weird. And I was like, are airplane windows square? And I didn't know. And then I got to be older, and I was like, yeah, I don't see any big square windows here on airplanes. When I finally, 18, I took my first flight. I went, no big square windows on any of these planes. So that was weird. Let's see what else. When I get up to high school age, I start having a lot of precognition stuff. And I have a journal for that. Like, I kept a journal of, I would have a dream where something was happening, where I would have a vision. Like, it would almost, now I'm used to it. The screen pops down. You're looking at the person, and then you're looking at what's going to happen to the situation they're talking about. And in high school, that's a little disturbing, because most of the stuff that you see as an intuitive in high school is the stuff that has a lot of emotional content to it. Our brains are very impressed by emotional content. They're less impressed by things like numbers and hearts and stars and the stuff that all the ESP people want you to try to do to become ESP. If you do remote viewing, you realize it's where is there a lot of trauma, and your brain will hook onto that trauma, emotional, physical, otherwise, like nobody's business. So I would have a situation, and I didn't realize I was getting known for this until I was like, why are all these kids coming to talk to me? Where kids would come and talk to me about their problems, a screen would pop down, and it would either be the answer of what they should do or how it was going to work out if they did nothing. And I just go blah, 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 and tell them. And then they go away. And then they come back a few months later and say, you know how you told me such and such would happen if I did nothing? Well, that's what happened, And I'd be like, okay, cool, but I also had dreams, and the dreams, to me, it was almost like I was there. So I had more emotional content to the dreams, and I would keep those in a journal. So one of the dreams was about a young man who I wasn't friends with, but Emma was friends with. We had both been in a gifted after school program. I was a year older than him, and I left the gifted after school program because he kept following me around and staring at me and saying, I've seen you naked. And I'm like, no, you haven't. I never undressed in front of you. And I was a really tough girl. My dad was and he was a tough boy. So his dad was a sheriff deputy, and my dad was a teacher. They were both karate teachers. My dad was probably the better. He was a dance form taekwondo teacher. He was probably the more old style. He would make your body and your mind really good. This kid's dad did more of the fighting stuff. Like, you wouldn't really want to get in a fight with him because they'd fight dirty. So I kept considering like fighting him if he didn't shut up. And then I realized that his dad was the dirty karate teacher that taught people how to like do things like twist your hand back and really hurt you. And I didn't want to get involved with that because I played the piano, and if he broke my hand or hurt my hand, I wouldn't be able to do that. So I ended up leaving because also he was saying this in front of other people. I've seen you. And he would stare at me and he'd look me in the eyes. He said, you remember, I've seen you. You were on the ship and you were naked. And I'm like, no, but it was bugging me. It was like really like I was getting into that sort of fugue state of there's something else going on here and it's really disturbing. And so I left the gifted after school program because I couldn't get him to stop doing what he was doing. And it was dredging up stuff. And I was not ready to deal with that stuff. So come to find out a few years later, he ended up dying. And they said that he had, like the cover story was that he had committed suicide in his barn. But the real story was that his parents found him in the morning in his room, naked, with a hole in his head and no blood from the hole. The hole was a wound that had been cauterized. And they weren't sure what kind of weapon could make a cauterized hole in your head, like the gun to the side of the head. And his dad was a policeman, so they took all his journals to see, well, did somebody kill him? Was he into drugs? Was there something going on? And the worst thing he was into was Dungeons and Dragons. And then the other thing was that he was talking about aliens, but he was talking about them as if they were elves, and that there were certain kids at school who they were coming to visit who would all be leaving with the aliens because they were all elves. So he had equated the aliens with the Silmarillion story, or the Lord of the Rings, where the elves are going to be leaving and going to the Western lands. And so he had identified certain other kids who were elves, and I was one of those kids. And he wrote about me all the time, and he wrote about me so much that it sounded like he and I had a relationship of some kind to the people who read his journals. Well, I had been dreaming about him, and in my dreams I had been telling him, you shouldn't do that or you're going to get dead. And I wasn't sure what he was doing. Like, I wasn't sure what he was doing that was going to make him dead, but it was probably something to do with the aliens. Like, he probably wasn't keeping still. Mind control wasn't working, so he wasn't keeping still. And I just remember in my journals, there were all these things like, and all of a sudden, here's this guy, Dave, and he's with my friend Jeannie, and I'm telling him, you need to stop doing that or you're going to end up dead. But I really am afraid that he's going to end up dead. And he ended up dead. So it was kind of a weird dream / psychic thing, but he remembered much more in his journals than I think any of us. And I think that was part of the problem, was that even as a middle schooler, I was in 8th grade, he was in 7th grade, when he was going around saying, I've seen you naked. And how do you deal with abduction experiences if you're a kid and you remember them? And so many of us get angry. It's like they've taken our memories away. And it's like, yeah, but you can function for the most part. You might have certain levels of dysfunction. You might eat too much. You might want to drink too much. You might want to smoke too much pot. You might want to do some heroin if you ever get your hands on it, anything to sort of deal with the trauma that you've had. But if you're very, very aware of it and you're alone, how do you deal with that, especially if you're a kid? So even though I didn't really like him, what happened is, because I was in his journal so much, I had people watching me, and my friend Jeannie and my friend Emma, we were all sort of being watched right after he died to see what was going on with us, and to see if we were involved in drugs, where, somebody was going to kill us, if drug deal went bad. None of us were involved in drugs. We were all honor students. So about a week after he died, I was working on my homework and cooking dinner at the same time, and for my family. And I heard a voice in my head said, call Emma. And I was like, okay, well, after I finish this trig problem. And then the voice said, no, call Emma right now. So I picked up the phone and I called my friend Emma, and she, at that moment, was holding a gun to her own head. And I was like, because I said, hey, Emma. And she was like, yes. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm holding a gun to my head. And I'm like, is it loaded? Yes. And I'm like, put it down. And I'm like, why are you holding the gun to your head? And apparently she had been getting phone calls from an unidentified person or persons, which sounded very mechanical. Like it was hard to tell if they were male or female. And the voice was like, almost robotic, but it still had a human edge to it. And they had been calling her persistently, trying to tell her to kill herself. And I was like, who in the hell would want you to do that? And so I just had a conversation with her, and I said, look, I don't know how bad it is. She goes, no, you don't understand. It's not bad. It's just, I keep getting these phone calls. And I said, well, stop answering the phone. And so I'm like, let your mom pick it up. This was before cell phones. So it was like, it was her house phone. I said, let your mom pick it up. And she went, oh, right. I said, you don't need to pick up the phone. She's like, oh, right. I said, your mom will pick it up and they won't say anything to her. Oh, right. I said, so we're done with them, right? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, what in the world were you thinking, that you would like keep picking up the phone and somebody would tell you this shit? But the weird thing was the mechanical voice, because that's come up in other stories from abductees, and it happened later on the next week. So I stayed really close to her after that event because I wanted to make sure nobody was trying to mess with my friend. And we ended up going to a party that was a dud, and we went back to her house. Her dad was the district attorney for our town, so he was the town attorney. He knew all of, and it was just right after this boy Dave had died. And so he was really on alert. We came back from the dud party, and we were watching Jekyll and Hyde in her basement family room, which had this long circular couch. You could fit two people end to end. So I'm on one side, she's on the other of this long circular couch. And we're eating popcorn. We're in our sleeping bags. We decide to sleep down there. The movie is boring. We're talking girl talk. We go to sleep. It's about 1:15, and wake up in the morning. I don't remember anything at that point. I wake up in the morning, and her entire family is awake. Her mom is making this luxurious breakfast with all the fixings, like, it's somebody's birthday or beyond, it's Mother's Day. And as we're sitting down at the table, I'm looking at her, I'm like, does your mom normally cook breakfast like this on a Sunday? And she's like, no. And I'm like, and I'm kind of looking at her like, is everything all right? And she's just shaking her head like, no, something's really, really wrong. Something's really off. And I sit down, her dad sits down next to me, and he starts pumping me for questions about what we did the night before. And I said, well, we drove out to this party, but the police had already broken it up. So by the time we got there, it was just the host of the party and a couple of his friends, and it started to snow and the roads were getting bad. So my tires are kind of bald on the truck. So I decided to come back. We had a conversation, and I didn't tell him that, she was throwing black cats out the window of my truck. And then we were bored. And so we came back to watch a movie and eat popcorn, and we fell asleep. And he kept asking me over and over and over again, so what did you do last night? And I would answer the same way. And then her mom would go, would you like more strawberries? Would you like some coffee? And I was like, no, I don't drink coffee. Hot chocolate, yes, please. So her mom is like giving me everything I like while he's pumping me for information. And Emma is just looking at me like, this is all sorts of wrong. I don't know what's going on here. It's really, really wrong. And then the phone rings, and it's my dad, and he just says, okay, are you all right? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, well, come home now. And I'm like, but I'm halfway through breakfast. He's like, I don't care, come home now. get in the truck, come home now. And I'm like, okay. I go home, and rather than like, he actually meets me halfway from their house to home, and it's a 20-minute drive. So by the time I'm halfway there, he's on the road, and I'm like, see him, and I wave at him. I'm like, why are you like trying to, come follow me home? And he's like, I'll tell you when we get home. He followed me home. We get home, I find out that there have been what people who said they were FBI agents, but they weren't because they didn't leave any pink slips, which is an FBI thing, had taken all my journals. My dad had woken up in the middle of the night thinking something was wrong. And he couldn't remember that I had told him I was going out with Emma to this party. So he ended up calling the police because he was like, where is she? Is she in her room? No, she's not in her room. Well, where is she? Something's really wrong. So he ended up calling the police, and the sheriff's department was like, oh, we're already looking for them. They went missing from this house. And the district attorney, she's with the district attorney's daughter, and they're both missing. And what had happened is the district attorney had heard a noise, saw lights on the lawn, and heard a noise in the house, looked down on the lawn, saw the lights, went to check on everybody in the house, and we were missing. Our sleeping bags were there, our popcorn bowls were there, but we were nowhere. They woke everybody else up. They searched the house. They called the police. They started searching outside the house. And then the police arrived, and the police were searching. And then over at my house, after my dad called, these supposed FBI agents arrived, but they never left any pink slip. They took all my journals, took all my diaries. And I get home, and I'm under house arrest because they're afraid somebody's going to kill me, like this guy Dave. And they tell me the story of what happened to Dave, and that it wasn't a suicide like people had said at school, that it was very mysterious, and that he had been found naked, dead on his floor with a hole in his head that was cauterized. And I'm like, well, I don't want that to happen. you know so I spent a few days just terrified, my dad walking around the house with a gun. And it was like Monday or Tuesday night. Oh, it was this time of year. It was right before Thanksgiving. And finally my stepmom to be says, hey, we gotta, we need milk and butter and eggs and bacon and stuff, to feed people. We need to go out and go shopping. So they packed up all the other kids and themselves in a car, tell me to lock myself in the house and leave. And I'm like, well, can't dad stay with me? And they're like, no, we gotta go. So they go shopping, and all of a sudden, once they're at the end of the drive, the phone rings. I pick up the phone, and it's that mechanical robotic voice that Emma was getting. And somebody on the other line is saying, we know you're in there alone. We know you're by yourself. And I'm like, yeah, and we're coming in. And I was like, yeah. And I was just a bunch of F-bombs, threw a bunch of F-bombs at whoever it was. I was already out of my mind with adrenaline. I hung up the phone, ran out the basement door, ran to the neighbor's house, called a friend, had her come pick me up. But the mechanical voice got me. It was, you couldn't tell. Is it male? Is it female? Is it a robot? What is it? It's rah, 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 rah. And then my friend came and picked me up, and we went to her house in the middle of nowhere. And she and her mom and I just sat by my bed before I went to bed, and we just started praying. I was like, I got to get out of this. I can't be dead. I'm only 17. I don't know. I don't want to end up waking up dead. And she's like, oh, I'll just, let's pray about what you want to have happen. And I went to bed feeling great. I woke up in the morning feeling great. And I had all these other people that were scared. And I was like, nope, I'm not going to be dead. I've worked it out. And it was just like, I knew in my soul and my spirit, I worked it out. Nobody wants to kill me. I'm not going to be dead. We'll be fine. And, Emma was still scared. Her dad was still scared. My dad was still scared. And I was just like, nope, I'm fine. I'm going to school. and it just went away. So it became one of those weird things that you just like, well, that was weird, and you move on from it. And it wasn't until the beginning of the book where I was 23, about to turn 24, and there's an alien, and I'm in my apartment, and I'm awake and I'm paralyzed, and it's thinking at me and having a conversation. I went, oh yeah, this is what the rest of that was about. I get it. So yeah.
So was this the event that pushed you to contact Bud Hopkins?
Yes, because I was so incredibly conscious, and I was so paralyzed, and I was so consciously paralyzed. And it wasn't just one alien. Like, one alien had come up the stairwell to my room, but my cat was downstairs playing with about 5 others. So I think there were like a total of 6 aliens in my house. And this was a little blue guy, had seal-like eyes, high cheekbones, a little bit of the seal modeling on the sides of the face, a dusky blue robe, which is kind of, dusky blue kind of went with his coloring. And he comes up the stairwell and he's thinking at me. I have been in the process of reaching for a baseball bat, because I always kept a baseball bat by my bed in case somebody broke into my house, right? So I'm in the process of reaching for the baseball bat beside the bed, and I get stuck mid reach for the baseball bat. And I'm paralyzed, and I'm thinking, I'm looking at the stairwell, and he says, I'm coming up the stairs. And I'm like, well, I know you are. I'm going to beat the crap out of you, you little. And he's like, well, I'm going to be at the top of the stairs in just a moment. He gets to the top of the stairs. He looks dead at me. He turns his face from side to side, and he says, look at me, in his head. This is all telepathic. Look at me. And I'm like, I'm looking at you. I can't look anyplace else, you little. And a lot of F-bombs. And he's like, no, really, look at me. Turns his head from side to side. And he's like pointing out his cheekbones, and he says, we're related. See, we're related. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to move the effity F. I just don't care who the F you effing are. I'm going to move. How dare you paralyze me? Right. And so right as I move, I finally get up enough adrenaline, because adrenaline, like the mind control that they use to paralyze you, won't last with adrenaline, but you can only put out adrenaline for so long. I get up enough adrenaline and I move, and this guy goes up and up my skylight, from the stairwell to my skylight. And I just watch, it's quicker than anything I've ever seen. It's just whoop, and he's up and out. And the little rolly thing for the skylight goes like that. And then I hear downstairs the ones that have been playing with the cat, because I can hear the cat being played with. And I can hear telepathically in my head, like this laughter and this fun of the other ones that are downstairs playing with the cat. I hear footsteps. I hear a telepathic conversation like this. Woo, look at this one. He's a crazy one, And then I hear swap, 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 swap. And they're all like either going out the windows or going out the wall. But I can see that in my head, that they're just going swap through solid matter. And the one that was on the stairwell going out the window, there's a thwop to it too, but and then the rolling of the thing. And I was totally awake for the whole thing, but I was paralyzed. So I was feeling very vulnerable, because it doesn't matter if you have a baseball bat, you're not going to be able to do anything if you're paralyzed. So that's when I called Bud Hopkins. I was like, okay, yeah. And what my dad said may not have been so crazy. And I had this knowing when he said we're related, that we really were related in some way. He was some relative of mine. So, but I was not at all pleased about being paralyzed. And
so what happened after contacting Bud? He transferred you to John?
Well, yeah, he was very interested, because it was the same night that the Brooklyn Bridge incident happened with Linda Napolitano. And she woke up that night. I woke up that night. They seemed to want to wake me up. They didn't take me anywhere and suppress any memories. And I had had a lot of experiences where I was taken a lot and the memories were suppressed. But this was one where it was like, really, look at me. be conscious and look at me. And Linda's experience that night was the same thing. So it seemed like they wanted to wake some people up, and he was on top of that right away. He had just had conversations with John Mack, and John was about to meet with Linda Napolitano and some other people in his group, which I think he did in the beginning of December. And so this was November 29th, is again this time of year. And I heard back from Bud before December 10th. It didn't take very long for him to call me back, but I was pretty much sleepless for days. I mean, I might let myself have 2 hours of sleep a night. And then Bud called, and then I talked to my dad, and my dad started coming out with his stuff. I talked to my sister. My sister started coming out. She was like, yeah, you weren't a kicker. You know, it was the aliens at the end of the bed, and they paralyzed me, and I didn't like it. And so my family immediately, as soon as they knew that there wasn't any more keeping it in the box, at least those two were just like, yeah, no, we know about that. My mom, never in a million years. That was not something she was going to be able to deal with. And she just didn't have the capacity for it. So I didn't really end up talking to her about it. And then had a phone conversation with Dr. Mack in January, and then picked up his book to kind of see who he was, The Prince of Our Disorder, which won the Pulitzer Prize. And that was a hard read. It's like, this is a man with a lot of big words. He must be very smart. But it was also exciting that somebody like that would want to, look into alien stuff. And the hope was, not to be put in a rubber room. Not that I ever thought that was going to happen to me, but I was like, well, I do want to find out what's going on, but I want to find it out with somebody who is not going to, I'm not going to get dinged for it. So our first meeting was in May. My first regression with him was right after that. I had another regression with another lady, which was terrible. As soon as we got to the hard part, she got scared, and so she pulled me out. And so I was just walking around in the middle of the most traumatic part for days, and I didn't want to ever see her again. And Dr. Mack was great. He, he took the whole 4 hours that was necessary to go through, because it was about a 3-hour experience. And then, so there's the induction, and then there's kind of coming out of it, grounding yourself again. He took as much time as was necessary. He went through all the hard stuff. He didn't flinch. And that was really, really helpful. And you wanted to put patient of Dr. Mack. So the way it ended up is I ended up getting like psychological tests up the yin yang to make sure that I didn't have something else going on. And there wasn't anything. So originally, when he started the work, he thought about taking insurance money for it by saying that we had generalized anxiety. And I was saying, well, my anxiety seems pretty specific to me. I mean, I'm not afraid of driving in a car. I'm not afraid of bees. I'm not anxious about work. I was working full time, going to school full time, and having this happen. So I was pretty highly functioning, but I wasn't sleeping at night. And he's like, and they just decided not to do it because it wasn't really, what are you going to say is going on here? You don't really know. So never ended up being a patient, was only ever a research subject. But that had its benefits because I met a lot of nice therapists too. Things like relationships and stuff like that, they were very helpful with. So
how did Dr. Mack cope with what he found out regarding your story?
How did he cope? Well, he's tried to do self-protection. I used to think that when he would say, well, I feel like it's the spiritual realm trying to come through and give us a message that we're really out of line. And when he would say that, I felt like that was his self-protection for saying that physical things weren't happening to people. But I knew that they were, because how would I be missing for 9 hours when nobody could find me? How would I go missing from a basement with another person with police looking without people finding me? How do you end up with hybrid children if the hybrid children are just spiritual? you know and who cares about genetics if it's just spiritual? We don't need genetics in the spiritual realm. So what the hell? You don't need physical bodies to do that stuff. So why in the heck would there be a genetic program if it's not physical? So I would, my first thing was, he was trying to figure out how to protect himself with his colleagues. And he did have Julia and myself give talks to his Harvard colleagues, and we were the first two people that worked with him. And Julia was, great, no nonsense mom, 2 kids. I hope I presented well. I'm not sure, but he's basically trying to introduce it to the clinicians that he knows without being signed off. And so he would say, well, I'm not sure anything physical is going on. I don't have any proof of that. And then we had a whole conversation of what would be proof, and what would be proof would be a dead alien in a spaceship, and that came from Dave Pritchard at MIT. And you know what? He's right. You would need a dead alien in a spaceship to really have proof. I mean, and an implant isn't going to do it, because you don't know what it is. I had an implant. It was made out of carbon-13. It had a braided structure, but it wasn't made out of anything. There was some aluminum, some silicon, some nickel. Other than having this really intense braided structure and being made out of carbon-13, which humans don't normally make things out of. At that time, they didn't realize that was quantum computing material. Now they know that's what that is. Now we know what that is. But other than that, you can't prove that aliens made that has anything to do with aliens. So unless you have a working spaceship with a dead alien in it, you don't know what you've got. So
how did you know you were part of the hybrid program?
Well, all of my initial, I knew I was pregnant, but I was in deep denial about it at my senior year. And I had broken up with my boyfriend, so it couldn't have been my boyfriend's. And I was missed a few periods, and I just knew I was pregnant. And that was like a 3-4 month pregnancy. But I was in deep denial about what that was about. And then all of my regressions had absolutely everything to do with that, everything to do with the hybrid program, the first regressions that I had. And it was actually really hard on the body. It's difficult. A lot of us ended up with PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome. We kept getting our ovaries poked. What are your ovaries going to do? They're going to get inflamed. Then what are they going to do? They're going to get cysts. Then what's going to happen? You're going to have other endocrine problems. So there's side evidence, but from all the regressions, it was just over and over and over again, hybrid program. And it was hard. It was hard on the body. So
do you recall
hard on the mind.
Do you recall being on the craft? Because you were abducted a few times, so I thought that maybe you might have woken up.
Yeah. No, I recall being on different kinds of craft, but usually for the typical abduction, it's usually a bigger craft. Could be one of the football field size ones, but you could take a smaller craft to the bigger craft. The funnest memory I have is there are bases on the moon. So, just get over that, everybody. So some of it is, sometimes you're being taken in the smaller craft up to a base on the moon. Sometimes you're being taken in the smaller craft to a bigger craft. But one of the most fun experiences I had was being on a smaller craft. It was probably a larger pseudo saucer shaped craft, and it had seating that was all in the round. So we had 2 pilots in the front, 2 co-pilots next to each one of them, and it's seating for a bunch of abductees all the way around. And they always have ergonomic benches. They have the best seating. But we're coming back from the moon or a bigger craft. I don't remember which one. But the thing I remember is them turning off the gravity in the ship. So they turned off the gravity so we can all just jump around in anti-grav after being abducted. And it's a tremendous amount of fun. You know, we're jumping around in anti-grav, and these little pilots are going, hee, 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 hee. They're funny. I mean, they love to play. Like if they can get people to play or animals to play or, you know, anything that's fun that's play, they love that sort of stuff. So, and it was great fun. So, the things that come to me is a lot of indirect lighting. That's one. So we have light panels, those walls. We have a lot of molded ergonomic furniture, a lot of ergonomic benches you can sit on. A lot of round, because crafts are round, but you can have thimble shaped. So two crafts that I know, one's a seed pot shaped, which is a saucer shape, and one is thimble shaped. But it's still, you have two floors on the thimble shaped one. So you have an upstairs and a downstairs. And I don't know. Let's see. The big ships are the weirdest experience I have, and I thought it was a dream, but it might not have been, was I was on a big craft, and one of the little gray guys, he was in between gray and white guys. So it seems to me that the blue guys are about paralyzing the physical body and mind control. So if you're having a screen memory and you can't move, it's usually telepathically implanted by a blue guy. And that's what they're made for. Like that's their job. That's their genetic capability. So blue guys were about that. And they could really be dirt bags, but maybe that's because I thought of them that way because I didn't like being paralyzed. And then the short blue guys were about that. They're tall blue guys that are usually engineers. They're super, super smart. They're 7 feet tall, 6.5 to 7 feet tall. Short blue guys, 3.5 to 4 feet tall. I'm laughing because I just remembered a story I can't tell because it involves too many F words to be done correctly. You know, blue guy, for example, they're taking a baby out of me, and the blue guy has me paralyzed, and I'm really pissed. And I've already expended all my adrenaline for 7 minutes spinning around on the table, right? So they've got me back down to finish doing what they're doing. And a blue guy's looking over me, and I'm calling him an F face. And I'm like, you are such an F face, you know, and I'm saying it with all my, what I have left of my vehement hatred and adrenaline, you are such an F face. And he goes, oh yeah, well, you want to know what you look like to me? I'm like, no. And he goes, like, no, I'll show you what F face is. And he's looking at my girl parts, and all of a sudden he morphs his face into like my girl parts. and I'm like, ah, you know. So it's sense of humor. I mean, it's blue humor, but it was just like, if I'm going to call him an F face, he's going to show me what an F face really looks like. Well, you want to see your F face? There's your F face, you know. So blue guys can be very funny, but they're so maddening. And then, so anyway, you have these different, like you have these med techs and nurses. Nurses are generally yellow to brown or orange, very female. They tend to wear very fuzzy stuff. So you remember about the monkeys that had either the fuzzy doll or just the wire, you know, and the psychological training thing, like, do monkeys bond better with fuzzy stuff? So the nurses are wearing like fuzzy orange brown stuff, and they take care of babies. And so we have those, and then you have different kinds of med techs that are kind of white, but they're a lesser toned white. They're medium sized. Then you have praying mantis beings. They're usually in control energetically, but they often have more of a like nobody really messes with the praying mantis beings. If praying mantis says to one of the techs, don't do that to that one, the tech listens. Um, and then you have, I've never seen any green ones. We have some kind of dingy orange brown ones that might be the males of the nurses. Nurses really seem to be female. And different heights of blues doing different things, different heights of grays doing different things. I had a blue guy put me back in bed on Easter before I really woke up. And he was very tall and very sweet. But he was putting me back in bed. So I don't know where he was in terms of the experience. Anyway, this medium gray white guy was telling me in the weird experience, which I was kind of thinking was a dream, that an enemy was coming from an enemy ship, and he handed me this ball of light. So this like resonating, pulsing ball of plasma or light. And he said, I need you to go outside and take care of the problem. Go out on the exterior of the craft. And I looked down and I had like gravity boots on. And he goes, and you need to hurl this at the ship that's coming up. Can you do that? And I was like, and my whole thought was, I don't know that they're enemies. Why would I hurl this ball of light of whatever this is at somebody just because you told me they're enemies? I don't know they're enemies. And I'm holding on to this ball of light, and I get in this, he walks me into this elevator. I go up to the elevator. I go to a portal where I end up, the elevator takes me to the skin of the outside of the craft. I'm in my gravity boots. I don't appear to have any suit on. There's some field that has, like, there's some atmosphere on the outside of the craft. I'm walking on the outside of the craft, and I see this other craft start to pull up beside us. And I'm hearing telepathically him saying, okay, throw it. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to throw it. How do I know they're enemies? Maybe they just want to survive too, you know? So I end up dropping the ball of light on the spaceship that I'm on. And I need to put the battery in. So when I drop it, my entire spaceship that I'm on blows up. Well, right. And then I wake up. But I don't wake up. I'm still in a dream. And in my dream, I'm standing in line naked at the Bank of America with Mick Jagger behind me. And he's naked in line at the Bank of America too. And I turn around to see Mick Jagger. And then all of a sudden, he's the devil, and he opens up his mouth and he starts to pull at my hair and swallow the back of my head. And, it's like, pleased to meet you. I guess hope you know my name. But I think part of that dream is real, where the ship, like the basic proportions of the ship and the little guy who was talking to me, and he might not have been saying what he was saying, but it was the oddest thing to be told, here, go throw this at these are enemies, go throw this at them. And I think it was a test. And part of the test was, you think for you, tell you. And I think for myself. So let me get this. Hold on 1 second. There you go. But the ships are very large, by the way. The big ships that are out there, they're big. So
I heard that you took out from your nose a wire.
Yeah, red wire. Yeah, that was the carbon-13. It was unbreakable under a tensile strength test. They sent Dave Pritchard at MIT, ended up being the person it went to first. He sent it to somebody at the University of Michigan who did a scanning tunneling electron microscope, pictures of it, and tried to figure out if there were any non-Earth elements in it. The braided structure was really amazing, and it would lead me now, if you look up quantum computing and you understand rolled carbon-13, which would come like a wire, what that does is it allows fermions from molecules to be bounced back and forth, from atoms to be bounced back and forth. So quantum computing is really fermions being bounced back and forth between each other. And carbon-13 is aligned in such a way that you can bounce fermions back and forth from each other. So the main thing this was made out of was carbon-13. It had a nickel aluminum silicon shell. It was unbreakable. It had a very interesting interior structure, but nobody could say what it was, so it wasn't proof that it was anything at all. And we hadn't really gotten into, this was 91 going into 92, we hadn't gotten into quantum computing as a species yet. And we just started to do that 8, 9, 10 years later, where, you know, they started out with germanium and they were like, oh, carbon-13, let's do that. Let's see what that does. So, and that got Dave Pritchard interested in the subject. And so he decided to hold the Abduction Studies Conference at MIT. He took a lot of flack for that at MIT, but you have to understand that David Pritchard has every single scientific award other than the Nobel Prize. And the only reason he doesn't have the Nobel Prize is because his student, Wolfgang Ketterle, has the Nobel Prize. So he really did work on a Nobel Prize winning project. It's just the guy who got named for the Nobel Prize was Wolfgang Ketterle. So Dave Pritchard, if you go and you look at his CV, he has every single physics science prize there is that is worth having. And so he didn't really care who made fun of him because he's Dave Pritchard, you know? And he's like, well, you know, when you're as good as I am, you know, you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to do what I want. And, but he's also, it makes him sound like he's really egotistical. He's not. He's a really great guy. He loves things like remote viewing and, you know, but he was the one who came up with, well, what you need for proof is a dead alien in a spaceship that still works. So
did you ever figure out why these events were happening to you?
There's a thing called dual reference. And in some planes of existence, I am, and actually many different kinds of aliens over time. I've been many different kinds of aliens over time. Okay. And in other places, other time frames that are both close and far from this human existence. So the other thing is there's, over time, I've changed my, it's rare that people will be abducted by aliens because I think it really, for the most part, a series of abductions means that somebody in your family is a genetic lineage that they're interested in. If you get abducted once, it means something happened to your environment that they're interested in. They want to see how it affected you. And I know people have been abducted once and they really don't have anything else. And you know, when they were a kid, they were around an atomic test or something else was going on near them. And they're just being picked up as an epidemiological study. I know people that are only astrally abducted, like they get pulled out of their body and they get taught stuff. So they're not part of the hybridization program. They're not having physical stuff happening to them. They don't have a physical genetic that makes them useful physically for them. So they do their work in the astral. I would like to say it's because I'm special, because I've heard other abductees say that, but you know, for an abductee, I'm not all that special. So, you know, I can't really say that. You know, I can't say I have some Native American in me, but I'm also Irish and Scottish and German and French. So I would love to blame the Cherokee because the Cherokee were more adept at understanding that this was happening. Like they had little white men that came and took their children away and taught them things. So, and that's kind of where my brother TJ got to go work with the shaman who understood, yeah, star people come and they take kids away and they teach them stuff. So, but I don't think I can just blame it on the Cherokee. So,
how was your coming out when you came out with your book?
Oh, well, I had decided long before that to work for myself before I wrote my book. And so I wasn't working in science. I worked for a while at MIT in science. And worked for the chair of the chemistry department. I worked for the guy who's now the head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for the United States. I was his assistant. MIT was great because I actually put the abduction research stuff on my CV, and they were like, "Great, we want you." It was like they made total fun of Dave Pritchard, but when I put it on my CV, they're like, "Well, you're very honest, so we want you, and you're very curious about the world. So we'd rather work with you than somebody who's not curious and isn't honest." Um, so MIT, like I loved academic work. I never really did any corporate work. I just was working by myself and had planned to do that, so it wasn't a big deal when it came out. And I was grateful that all the people that I wrote about in the book supported the book, because I called them up and I said, "Here's the book. Is that how you remember it?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's how I remember it." I was afraid that they would come back and say, "Oh no, no, this never happened. It didn't happen that way, or this time, or whatever." And I'm like, but they did. So
Did ever now regarding the military, now you did have that mechanical
yeah.
contact you, but did anyone from the military or like government ever knock at your door?
So there's a whole other thing. There is a MyLab component to this. It's very, very deeply buried. I am a MyLab, and I'm pretty sure Dave was as well. So what happened when I was working with John Mack, this became apparent, not because he was looking for experiences that, like, when the police came, he wanted to know if there was an experience there. So I got regressed right away for when Dave died, and we were in my friend's Emma's basement, and we were abducted from the couch. We went immediately to that so he could ascertain if there was an experience there. So I have a regression from that, and there was an experience there. Little blue guys came, they picked us up, hauled us out of the room, and there's a regression for that is on tape. So he was looking to get information from the police, and because it was so long ago, they hadn't any files on that or anything like that. But we do have the regression from that. Military stuff, what would happen is I'm trying to figure out how to word this. So I'd be in regression with John for something that happened like the week before. I know that I had missing time the week before. I'd wake up with a bloody nose or a headache or something, or the thing coming out of my nose. So I get regressed for the night before the thing came out of my nose, for example. Then a couple of days later, I would get picked up again, and it was a totally different group of aliens, and I get regressed for that. And I wouldn't find out it was it was like, okay, so I got abducted on Monday, and I got abducted on Thursday. And so Monday was the little white guys, where I said there's blue guys, there's nurses, and the guys doing the hybridization stuff. On Thursday, it was reptilians, and they were trying to figure out what the other guys were doing. And the rooms were totally different. So like the reptilian ones, when the reptilian one would look at me, there was like no question. It was just looking at me. But I'm also like, I'm in a room that looks like a 1970s dentist office. You know, it's like I'm in a chair that looks like it could have come straight out of either a military complex or a really Spartan dentist. You know, it's metal. The walls have wallpaper. There's regular sort of 1970s style lighting, and there'll be a reptilian or two kind of going back over parts of my body that had been messed with by the regular gray guys, and then sort of like pumping me for information. Well, what are they doing with you? Well, what's their intention? Well, what's going on here? Right. And so this went on for months and years, where I would have my regular experience, and then I'd have a few days later the reptilians, and the reptilians were rough. Like they would be rough. So I almost bled to death after a reptilian experience, because they were like, well, how many did you have multiples that time? You know, did they take multiple children? Let's get up in there and find out. And I come back home and I'm just bleeding all over the place. So that it wasn't fun. But there was also this sense that when I would ask a question of the Greys, I said, are they involved with the military? And they would just smile. And the engineer would say yes. And the ones that weren't supposed to tell me anything would just smile and nod, which is not a yes or not a no. It's just they want you to, be placated. But my sense was they had something to do with the military. So, and then as I remote viewed a lot more stuff over time and gone back in time in my remote viewing, there's a lot of stuff from the secret space program from when I was young. And Dave, the guy who died, was involved with that as well. So, and no, I don't believe there's stuff on Mars right now, but I do believe in parallel realities. And I do think that the secret space program is in a parallel.
Okay.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Now, okay, well, let's call it a day. Do you have a closing statement, perhaps, or perhaps another story that you might want to share with everyone?
Have discernment. If you're some skills to learn, if you're an abductee, are self-care. Find some good means of mindfulness meditations that help for trauma. Sound therapy, Hertz music, binaural beats. If you don't have support, good support in your area, do the best that you can with the self-care that there is. Don't accept somebody else's story as your own. The only way to find out your story is to find out your story. And if you don't have helpers to do that, I would greatly say take a remote viewing class. Farsight's teaching online right now, because even if you can't regress yourself, you can remote view your own stuff. But also realize that you are probably gifted in ways you don't even imagine. So don't concentrate on your victimization, concentrate on your gifts. If you can help somebody with animal communication, if you can help somebody who's locked in with Parkinson's because you're telepathic, develop your telepathy, develop that organ, that muscle. It's invaluable to people who have parents and family members with Parkinson's, for example, to be able to have conversations with them. Or it's invaluable for people with animals to get really good information about how their animals are feeling. And it's invaluable for some vets who are just betwixt and between and can't make a diagnosis to figure out where the pain actually is. So get used to how your own body feels to you. Whatever you do, don't listen to the people who say this is a prison planet. There's so many lovely things about being human. There's so many beautiful things about our creativity and our artistry and our musicality and our ability to do the things that we want and not be tools for other people. So seek those things out and do them. And don't be hurt when not everybody wants to hear your story. Okay, they don't want to hear it, but everybody likes being listened to. So if you want friends, listen to your people. You don't always have to tell your story. You can listen to other people's story, and if they want to listen to you, then that's a bonus. And that's great. So that's it.
Thank you so much for coming on. You're a lovely person. I had loads of fun, and you're very funny.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was super fun today. So to those watching today's interview, I hope you enjoyed it. More interviews coming up. I'm your host, Mr. Great, and I'll see you guys next time. So take care, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Great, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.